Hi, John. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
Good. Yes, I'm glad you were able to join us. First, I just wanted to start out a little bit with your background. I want to know how you became involved in community activity.
hmm
How did it start out?
Well, so I've been involved in community organizing in the city of Seattle and policy work for the last 10 years. I used to work at an agency, a lot of folks up here know, Solid Ground, and I worked in their housing department, and I was a tenant advocate there. So I would help renters with, when they were having disputes with their landlords. So I was on a hotline a lot of the time talking to a lot of tenants, so I got to hear a lot of stories about problems with their landlords. I talked to over 4,000 tenants in the course of my career. So really got a good picture of kind of what the nature of displacement looks like and what are the things that we can actually do about it. So from there, I ended up working at the tenants union because I wanted to get more involved in systems change and actually try to address some of the root causes that are putting people in these unfortunate situations in the first place.
From what I read, you were very successful at the tenants union. I understand in my reading that initially there was a lot of staff that was lost in funding, but within 3 years after your arrival at the tenants union, the operating budget was doubled and new offices were opened in Seattle and the state. Is that true? And if so, how did you do that?
Yeah, it was a wild time. So I was previously working at Solid Ground in the housing department, and we were partnering a lot with the tenants union to do systems change work. And it was the recession, and a lot of government contracts were getting cut. A lot of foundations were being stretched thin, and unfortunately, the tenants union lost a lot of its funding. So they had to lay off their staff, and their office was essentially empty for a long period of time. I got brought on as executive director. I've actually previously joined the board to try to rebuild the organization. And the conversations that were happening at the time wasn't how do we save the organization, it was how do we responsibly close the doors of the organization. So it was very much like this is a done deal. But the tenants union has, or at the time had a 35-year history of just incredible work in the community, and it was just such a loss to lose that legacy and that history. So myself and a number of other board members and longtime supporters kind of came together and made one last push to save the organization. And I actually quit my job at Solid Ground and took on this job as executive director, and I didn't know if I'd still have a job 3 weeks later because that's how much the funding was in jeopardy at the time. And I just kind of scoured the earth to find some bridge funding, and was able to find a foundation to give us a bridge grant of $35,000 to kind of keep the doors open. And from there, it was just like this meticulous work of reestablishing relationships with local government, also with the federal government. I ended up landing a $200,000 contract with HUD, which is the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And that actually allowed us not only to kind of resuscitate the organization from within, but also expand it so that we were able to open offices over in Spokane. And we also opened up other offices across Seattle as well. So through a general will of the community, not wanting to let this amazing organization die. I can't take all the credit for that. I mean, that was people really understanding the value of the organization and really understanding the need of its mission to have a social justice organization for renters in the city, that I think ultimately kind of brought everyone together and allowed us to align the organization in a way where now it's thriving. It's got 10 people working there. We've doubled the budget and opened up new offices across the state and the city.
In terms of the activity with the tenants union, I understand that there was some involvement with your organization with the property between 3rd and 4th in Cherry, is it? But right across from the courthouse?
Yeah, so there is a plot of land that used to be the public safety building that's actually right in front of City Hall. And a lot of people have walked by it. It's that gigantic hole in the ground that's kind of walled off. And a lot of people don't know the backstory to that. gigantic hole, but here's what it is. So when I was at the tenants union, we started engaging in campaigns at a number of apartment complexes all throughout Seattle. Most notably the Lock Haven apartments in Ballard, the Theodora apartments in Ravenna, and the Downtowner apartments in the International District. What those buildings all had in common was that it was affordable housing for low-income families that was being bought out by the same developer, Goodman Real Estate. So we started mobilizing the community and actually created a citywide movement of renters to actually push back against these developments that were pushing out the low-income tenants that lived in these properties. And we started doing some investigating, and we found out that that gigantic hole that's in front of City Hall, it was actually public land that was essentially being sold to a partnership that this developer was a part of called Triad. So we were just in this situation where we could not get the developer to the table, and we were saying to them, we went to City Hall and we said, look, you have this incredible opportunity because this is public land that you own, that you're selling to this developer. You have leverage to actually bring them to the table on these other properties where folks are being evicted. And so we made the case that the city should intervene. Now we dug a little deeper, and it turned out that the permit for that plot of land in front of City Hall, which was called Civic Square, had expired. So the city had even more leverage to do something. They could say to the developer, look, your permit expired. We need you to negotiate to create more affordable housing on this public land. Or to, sell one of these other apartment complexes to a nonprofit. The city was just completely unwilling to do that. And that was one of my lessons in the work as an advocate on how important it is to have somebody in city council to be an advocate for the community. Because we simply don't have a progressive majority where even when we were mobilizing and trying to move the city on this serious issue of displacement, there was no voice that, other than Councilmember Sawant, O'Brien, and Licata, there was no voice to actually push back against that. So we eventually filed a lawsuit against that developer saying, it is just not right that we have a situation where this developer is economically evicting tenants left and right, often breaking the laws while they're doing it. And here, the developer is breaking the law, right, by letting this permit expire, and the city's just looking the other way. So that was that fight for against Goodman Real Estate to actually try to stop the displacement of those families.
Yeah. What has happened up to this point? Where are you now with that?
Well, so it's kind of a mixed bag. So in some of the different apartment complexes, we were able to stop their economic evictions, and we were able to win in court at the Downtowner. At the Lock Haven apartments, unfortunately, that place was redeveloped and more than doubled the rents on folks, and we were able to get expanded relocation assistance for those folks that was above and beyond what the law even required, and that was only because tenants came together and organized. But at the end of the day, what we really want to see is more affordable housing, and the city wasn't willing to put pressure on the developer to actually mandate that. So it was kind of a mixed bag.
There's a lot of residential construction going on right now downtown, high-rises, as well as more in Ballard, Capitol Hill, and in other surrounding communities. Compared to what's being built in terms of high-rise residential, can you guess how much of it is supposed to be affordable housing?
Oh, I don't have a number on that, but I know that if you do not put a requirement for there to be affordability in that apartment complex, it's not going to be affordable. There was an apartment complex that just went up in South Lake Union. The rents, I'm not making this up, the rents were $6,000 a month. So, I mean, we have a situation where, there's this argument that, supply and demand, we just build enough that will create affordability. That's not actually how the housing market works. If the demand is there from all these tech workers to actually pay higher rents, then they're going to build to that market. And so the units that they're going to build are not going to be affordable. So that's why I'm a big proponent of what's called a linkage fee, which is a law that basically mandates developers to set aside some of the units that they build to be affordable to working class or low-income workers.
You also mentioned in an interview with an urbanist, you were quoted saying new growth should to continue to be concentrated in urban villages. What did you mean by urban villages?
Well, there's lots of residential areas throughout the city. And one of the concerns that I have is that, I used to be a renter in one of these single-family homes, and my landlord owned 6 houses throughout Seattle. And one of the concerns that I have is if we just have a blanket change to the zone that says that, you can build a triplex there or something like that, or condos, tenants aren't going to be able to move from that single-family home to those condos. And so does that get at the goal of affordability? It's not totally clear. I think that there needs to be a nuanced way to do it. But I think that if we can have greater density and concentrate that in some of the existing urban villages that are like Old Ballard or even in Columbia City, I think that that's a good way to try to mitigate displacement, as long as we're not tearing down existing affordable housing to do it.
Okay. How would you increase the opportunity for those who can't afford to buy a condo or house to live comfortably and safely within the city limits? There's a reference that you made at one point to city's bonding authority to buy buildings that are already affordable housing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the bonding authority is something that the city has never used to actually address the housing crisis. So the city can use its bonding, for example, like the seawall, or if they want to build, a fire station, the city can use its bonding authority to kind of front load the financing to actually build a structure. So what I would like to see is for the city to use its bonding authority, and they could bond as high as over $500 million to build affordable housing that is either nonprofit owned or city owned, that essentially takes a big swatch of the affordable housing market, or the housing market, off the private market, right? So the problem that we see is that it's when these buildings get bought and then flipped is when people get economically evicted. It's not just that rents are going up, it's that transaction is what the real problem is. So part of the reason that happens is that the city has no control about when somebody wants to sell their property. So the city builds its own housing. We don't have that problem.
Okay. Well, moving on to transportation. What are your thoughts on the transportation initiative that will be on ballot in November?
Yeah, so the Move Seattle levy is $930 million. It's the largest transportation levy we'll have ever passed, if it does pass. I support the levy, but I was more supportive of it when Councilmember Licata introduced language to try to lower the cost burden on homeowners who are going to be kind of footing the bill on that levy. And what he had proposed was increasing a commercial parking fee tax, and also bringing back the employee hours tax, which is a tax on business based on how many employees you have. And my opponent, Tim Burgess, actually cut the employee hours tax in 2009, I think. And that, between now and then, I mean, that's tens of millions of dollars that could have been going towards addressing our maintenance backlog that's currently facing our transit system right now. So a lot of people are upset that the levy is as big as it is and that homeowners are going to pay for it, but we cut the tax, one of the more progressive taxes that made the private sector pay for that infrastructure. So I think that was a mistake. I think we shouldn't have cut that tax. I think that we should reinstate it and possibly, not possibly, but definitely increase it, so that it's not just homeowners who are fronting the cost of the burden of the bill for the $930 million levy. I think that we need to actually spread that cost to the private sector is paying for it too, because they're using our transit infrastructure as well.
Right. Now, in terms of education, Tim Burgess and the mayor have been insinuating themselves more and more into the Seattle public school system through the Families and Education levy and the preschool program, as well as establishing a Department of Education within the city of Seattle. What do you think the role should be of the city council and the city with our public schools, or should there be any role at all?
Well, right now our public school system is being starved to death, and this is a legacy of the unfunded mandate from our state legislature that we have to provide this. We have a constitutional obligation to provide basic education, and we are failing to do so. And the McCleary decision came out, and the Supreme Court is still, I mean, we're being fined $100 a day to try to get the necessary resources we need for our kids just to get a basic education. So the court has even gone as far as to say that using local levies to try to mitigate the loss of funds is also not constitutional. But at the same time, meanwhile, we have, you know, kids going to school, and so we need to actually address that. So I'm supportive of the Families and Education Levy, given the worst, you know, of all options. Like, we have to fund education through a levy, but I do take issue with the idea that the city council should be, or the mayor's office in particular, should be controlling the school district or school board. These are two separate democratically elected entities, and, you know, while I know that there's some disagreement often with the school board, I think it was a mistake for the mayor to try to get a state law passed to appoint school board members. I think that they should be democratically elected. Now, you know, the teacher strike is being resolved, and that's great, and we need to support our public school teachers. And I was disappointed with some decisions that the school board made around, you know, possibly taking legal action against the union. I think that was a huge mistake. But at the same time, the bottom line is that it's not teachers' fault that we have a state legislature that is just digging in its heels to actually fund the most basic constitutional duty of government, which is to provide a basic education. I was thrilled that the state Supreme Court just eliminated charter schools and said that those in fact are not constitutional either, because those were essentially sapping resources away from our public education system as well. And I think that was a real problem. And one of the things that, you know, I was really concerned is that, you know, my opponent never went on the record to say that he opposed charter schools or that he opposed the use of Families and Education Levy dollars to fund charter schools. And I think that would be a huge mistake, especially now that state resources can't be used to it. I would strongly oppose the use of Families and Education Levy dollars to fund the two existing charter schools that exist in Seattle.
In terms of public funding local elections, would you comment on Councilmember Mike O'Brien's proposal?
So I'm a huge proponent of Honest Elections Seattle. This is Initiative 122. It's going to be on your ballot this year, so you'll be able to vote hopefully for me and also this initiative. I think my race is perhaps the most indicative as to why we need this critical reform for campaign finance reform. My opponent has accepted over $280,000 from the top CEOs of this city, the downtown developers, the Chamber of Commerce, the Seattle Police Union Guild, and I just don't believe that money doesn't buy influence. And thanks to Citizens United, right, we have this incredibly uneven playing field. So for my campaign, I've taken a pledge not to accept any campaign contributions from downtown developers or from corporations or from CEOs. And, you know, I accept that challenge, but it means that my opponent is outraising, you know, me by, gosh, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And nonetheless, I think that for my race, this is winnable because people are fed up with money in our politics. And I think that Initiative 122, you know, will actually codify some of the things that I'm putting into practice voluntarily, right? It puts a cap on what the maximum contributions a donor can make. So it's not just the big donors that candidates are chasing around. And most importantly, it actually creates democracy vouchers. So everybody in Seattle has at least $100 that they can contribute to their candidate of choice. And that, I think, is a radical change, because when they did a study, it was about, gosh, a fraction of the majority of the resources that were funding campaigns came from multi-million-dollar households that had waterfront properties. And for the rest of the city, you know, folks just don't have the resources to play politics. And so I think that this would be a huge game changer and uplift the voice of many people in the city to participate in the political system and actually have influence.
Okay. The Capitol Hill blog wrote, a Princeton study last year found that the U.S. is more or less an oligarchy in which Mammon rules while the American public wields little influence over the policies our government adopts. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, this is why I'm excited to run for Seattle City Council, because I think that our democracy is in trouble at a national level. I think we cannot rely on Congress for anything. I don't even think we can really rely on the state legislature for a lot of things. I mean, look at the McCleary decision. But on a local level, what we're seeing is a renaissance of just a variety of social justice movements, right? We have the Black Lives Matter movement. We have this incredible moment right now where we can have campaign finance reform with honest elections, and Seattle could lead the nation on that. If we don't try to organize and mobilize on a local level, we just cannot be beholden to what these higher branches of government and higher decision makers, like we need to actually take control on the local level. Again, another great example is the $15 minimum wage. We did it here, and now it's spreading across the nation. So I think that this is an opportunity for Seattle to lead, and I think that it's not going to come from the federal government, it's not going to come from the state government, it's going to be local governments like this Seattle City Council that are going to lead the nation, and then it's going to be picked up by other cities across the country. That's why I want to see Seattle be an incubator for social change that will lead the rest of the nation. And that's one of the things that I've proposed actually is a 12-week paid parental leave program so that women can return to the workforce after they've had a child and not be disadvantaged due to the gender pay gap that exists in our city, which is one of the worst in the nation. In Seattle, a woman is paid 73 cents for every dollar that a man makes. That's wrong, and we can actually take steps to fix that on a local level, and we should.
Okay. The third plank in your platform is your position on police oversight. Can you explain your ideas on police oversight?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a very long haul to get to this point that we're actually having a serious conversation that may actually result in structural change at our police department. How many times have we seen videotape of officers using excessive force, or there being a case of police brutality where at the end of it, that officer is exonerated? I think that that's a problem. We've had a game of musical chairs with our leadership at the police department, where we have a new police chief every year. I'm glad that we've settled with Police Chief O'Toole. I'm very impressed by her. But changing the leadership is the first basic step. We now have to actually dig down into the institution and change how accountability actually happens at the police department. So I've called for the elimination of the Discipline Review Board, which is the entity that oversees officers who have been accused of excessive force. It's comprised of 3 members, 2 of which are cops. So that means that, essentially you have the police policing themselves, and that's a problem. So I would like to see the elimination of that, and actually also officers have 3 opportunities to appeal the decision to have them be fired. I think there should be 1 appeal process. And I think that there needs to be an ability for the Office of Professional Accountability to subpoena evidence from other departments, where currently they do not have that authority. These are some of the recommendations that have been outlined by the Community Police Commission, and I would like to see all 50+ recommendations put into effect, and have the Community Police Commission be actually established as an independent and oversight entity, so that we have civilian oversight of the police department. These are things that we've been talking about for years, but we have this unique moment where we have the Black Lives Matter movement putting a laser-like focus on police accountability. We have a new police chief, and we have a progressive movement putting pressure on the city council to actually enact these things into permanent reform. And those are things that I would like to fight for.
Okay. Before we end this interview, is there anything else you'd like to talk about that I haven't covered?
No, I mean, I think that we have this incredible opportunity right now to establish a progressive majority on the Seattle City Council. I think we have a different city. I think that the vote to change to a district system wasn't just a desire for more neighborhood control. I think it was people fed up with the kind of incrementalism that we've seen from city council folks who just are out of touch with the urgency that people are feeling right now in the community. I mean, we have the worst gender pay gap in the nation. We are 3rd in the nation for LGBTQ hate crimes. We have the highest rent increases of any other city in the country. These are crises that actually need bold, direct action. And I think that's why in the primary, I was able to get the percentage that I did, because people were ready for someone to say, you know what, let's try to tackle these things head on. And so next year we have an opportunity to have a true progressive majority on the city council, and I think people are excited and ready for that. So that's the kind of leadership I hope to bring.
Okay, I think they are very excited about the possibilities. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you very much, I appreciate it.